November 18th, 2003. Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department. Over 70 officers arrive at Neverland Ranch with a search warrant. They are looking for evidence. Evidence of alleged crimes, evidence that will be used in a criminal trial. They expect to find computers, photographs, documents. What they do not expect to find is a room that does not appear on any blueprint, a room accessible only through a concealed entrance. A room equipped with surveillance monitors, reinforced walls, and supplies for extended occupation. A panic room, hidden in the main house, built at significant expense. Designed according to sources close to Jackson to protect him from a threat he believed was inevitable. The question is not whether the room existed. It did. The question is what it reveals about the state of mind of the man who built it. Was Michael Jackson preparing for a legitimate security threat? Or was he consumed by a paranoia so profound that it shaped the architecture of his home? The panic room was discovered during the second day of the search. Investigators had been combing through the main residence for hours. Bedrooms, bathrooms, closets. They were documenting everything. Photographing, cataloging, following a methodical grid pattern to ensure no area was missed. One of the officers, according to later testimony, noticed an inconsistency. A wall that seemed thicker than it should be. A section of built-in cabinetry that did not align with the architectural logic of the surrounding space. He measured the exterior dimensions of the room and compared them to the interior. There was a discrepancy. Approximately 8 feet of space unaccounted for. Further inspection revealed a concealed door. It was not hidden behind a bookcase or triggered by a lever, as in movies. It was more practical. A section of wall paneling that could be slid aside if you knew where to press. The mechanism was electronic, activated by a keypad. The officers did not have the code. They forced entry, and what they found inside was not what they expected. It was not a storage closet. It was not a safe room for valuables. It was a fully equipped panic room, designed for human occupation, for extended periods. The room was approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, small but larger than a typical safe room. The walls were reinforced, concrete and steel, thicker than standard residential construction, soundproofed. The door, once closed, would be nearly impossible to breach without specialized equipment. Inside there was a chair, a small table, shelves stocked with bottled water and non-perishable food, a first aid kit, a phone line separate from the main house system, and most notably a bank of surveillance monitors, 6 screens, each displaying a feed from a different security camera positioned around the property. The cameras covered the main gate, the driveway, the front entrance of the house, the rear gardens, the amusement park area, and the road leading to the property. From inside the panic room, Jackson could see anyone approaching Neverland. He could watch them arrive, watch them move through the property, and if necessary, he could lock himself inside and wait. The room had ventilation, climate control. It was designed to be livable, not comfortable but survivable. The existence of the panic room was not mentioned in the initial police reports. At least not publicly. It was noted in internal documents. Investigators photographed it, thus documented its contents. But the information was not released to the media. It was considered a security detail, not relevant to the criminal case. But word leaked, as it always does. And by early 2004, journalists were reporting that Jackson had a hidden room. The reports varied. Some said it was a safe room for valuables. Others said it was a bunker. The truth, as revealed in later depositions and employee testimony, was somewhere in between. It was a panic room, built sometime in the late 1990s, and it was built because Michael Jackson believed he was in danger. From whom? That depends on who you ask. Jackson's security team, according to interviews, said the room was a standard security measure for high-profile individuals, that it was no different from what other celebrities or executives might install, that it was a precaution, not a sign of paranoia. But others, including former employees and associates, said Jackson's fear was specific, that he spoke frequently about being targeted, that he believed there were people who wanted to destroy him. Not metaphorically, literally. People who would come to Neverland, who would try to harm him or take him away. The phrase he allegedly used, according to multiple sources, was, "They're coming for me." He did not specify who they were. Sometimes he seemed to mean the media, the paparazzi who camped outside his gates, the tabloid journalists who fabricated stories. Other times he seemed to mean law enforcement, the investigators who had scrutinized him during the 1993 allegations, the district attorney who, Jackson believed, was obsessed with prosecuting him. And sometimes he seemed to mean something more abstract, a faceless conspiracy, an unnamed enemy, a threat that existed not in reality but in his mind. The panic room was built during a period when Jackson's life was particularly chaotic, the late 1990s. His marriage to Debbie Rowe had ended. His financial situation was deteriorating. He was spending more than he was earning. His album sales were declining, and the 1993 allegations, though settled, had never fully gone away. The stigma remained, the suspicion, the whispers. Jackson felt, according to those close to him, that he was under siege, that the world had turned against him, that he could not trust anyone. And the panic room was a physical manifestation of that feeling, a place where he could retreat, where he could be safe, where he could control who had access to him. But the room was not just about physical safety, it was also about surveillance, the monitors, the cameras, the ability to watch without being watched. Jackson, according to employees, spent hours in that room, not because he was hiding, but because he was watching, monitoring who came and went, checking the gates, reviewing footage. He was obsessed with knowing who was on his property, who had access, who could be trusted. The security system at Neverland was extensive, over a dozen cameras, motion sensors, infrared detectors, alarms on every door and window, and all of it fed into the panic room. Some employees found it excessive, others found it understandable. Jackson was one of the most famous people in the world. He had been stalked, threatened. There had been credible death threats over the years, fans who became obsessed, individuals who showed up at the gates demanding to see him. In 1999, a man was arrested on the property. He had climbed the fence. He claimed he had a message from God. He was unarmed, but the incident shook Jackson. He increased security after that, added more cameras, more guards, more layers of protection. But there is a difference between reasonable security and paranoia. And Jackson, according to several people who worked at Neverland, crossed that line. He would call security in the middle of the night, ask them to check the perimeter. He would watch the monitors for hours, convinced he had seen something. A shadow, a movement, a car that did not belong. Most of the time there was nothing, but the fear was real, and it consumed him. He could not relax, he could not sleep. He was constantly on alert, constantly waiting for something to happen. The panic room became a refuge, not just from external threats, but from the anxiety those threats created. When Jackson was inside, he felt safe. The walls were thick, the door was locked. No one could reach him. And for a man who had spent his entire life being accessible, being watched, being demanded of, that isolation was a form of relief. But it was also a trap, because the more time he spent in that room, the more disconnected he became. From reality, from the people around him, from any sense of normalcy. The 2003 search changed everything. The panic room was no longer a secret. Its existence became part of the public narrative. Prosecutors did not use it as evidence in the trial. It was not relevant to the charges, but the media used it. They described it as creepy, disturbing, evidence of a man who had something to hide. Jackson's defenders argued the opposite, that it was evidence of a man who had been hounded for years, who had every reason to fear intrusion, who was simply protecting himself. Both interpretations are valid, and both miss the larger point. The panic room was not about guilt or innocence. It was about fear, about the way fear shapes behavior, about the way a person, when subjected to enough scrutiny, enough pressure, enough violation of privacy, begins to see threats everywhere. Jackson was not paranoid without reason. He had been betrayed by employees who sold stories to tabloids, by friends who testified against him, by a legal system that treated him as guilty until proven innocent. His fear was not irrational, but the way he responded to that fear, the way he isolated himself, the way he built physical and emotional walls was destructive. The trial lasted 5 months, from January to June 2005. Jackson was acquitted on all counts, but the trial destroyed him, physically, emotionally, financially. He left Neverland shortly after the verdict. He told friends he could never go back, that the place had been violated, that it no longer felt like home. He moved to Bahrain, then Ireland, then Las Vegas. He never returned to Neverland. The property fell into disrepair. The panic room, still intact, sat empty, a monument to fear, to isolation, to a life lived under siege. In the years after Jackson's death, Neverland was sold. The new owners renovated. They removed much of the infrastructure Jackson had installed, the amusement park equipment, the zoo enclosures, and the panic room. According to reports, it was dismantled. The reinforced walls were torn down. The surveillance equipment was removed. The space was converted into a standard room. Storage, perhaps, or a closet. The details are unclear, but the room, as Jackson built it, no longer exists. What remains is the question: why did Michael Jackson feel the need to build a panic room? Was it justified? Was he responding to real threats? Or was he consumed by a paranoia that distorted his perception of reality? The answer, as with most things involving Jackson, is not simple. There were real threats. There were real reasons to be afraid, but there was also a spiral, a feedback loop. The more Jackson isolated himself, the more he was scrutinized. The more he was scrutinized, the more he isolated himself. And the panic room was both a cause and a symptom of that spiral. Security experts who have reviewed the Neverland system say it was excessive, that the level of surveillance, the number of cameras, the reinforced structures, went beyond what was necessary for a private residence, even for a celebrity. They describe it as a fortress mentality, a mindset in which the world is divided into two categories: safe and unsafe, friend and enemy, inside and outside. And when you live in that mindset, there is no middle ground, no nuance, no trust. Jackson's paranoia did not come from nowhere. It was fed by real experiences: the 1993 allegations, the media harassment, the financial exploitation by people he trusted, the constant invasion of privacy. Every one of those experiences reinforced the belief that he could not trust anyone, that everyone wanted something from him, that he was surrounded by enemies, and the panic room was a logical, if extreme, response to that belief. But it also trapped him, because once you build a room like that, once you retreat into it, it becomes harder to come out, harder to engage with the world, harder to trust. Employees who worked at Neverland during the late 1990s and early 2000s describe a man who was increasingly isolated, who spent more and more time alone, who avoided contact even with people he had known for years, who second-guessed every interaction, who interpreted every question as an interrogation, who saw betrayal in every corner. And the panic room was where he went when that feeling became overwhelming, when he could not handle the pressure, when he needed to disappear. But disappearing did not solve the problem, it made it worse. Because isolation breeds more isolation, fear breeds more fear. And the more Jackson withdrew, the more people speculated about what he was hiding. The more they speculated, the more he withdrew. It was a cycle that could not be broken, and the panic room, rather than providing safety, became a symbol of that cycle. A physical representation of a man who had been pushed to the point where he could no longer distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. In the years since Jackson's death, there has been a reevaluation of his life, a recognition that he was not just eccentric, but traumatized, that he was not just paranoid, but responding to real persecution, that his behavior, while extreme, was understandable in the context of what he had endured. The panic room fits into that reevaluation. It was not a sign of guilt, it was a sign of someone who had been hunted for so long that he could no longer feel safe, even in his own home. The room was never used for its intended purpose. Jackson never had to lock himself inside during an emergency. The threats he feared never materialized in the way he imagined. No one stormed Neverland. No one broke down the doors. The panic room sat there, unused, a monument to a fear that was real in his mind but never actualized in reality. And that, perhaps, is the most tragic part. That Jackson spent so much time, So much money, so much energy preparing for a disaster that never came. While the real disasters, the ones he could not prepare for, destroyed him anyway. The 2003 surge, the trial, the public humiliation, the financial collapse. Those were the disasters. And the panic room could not protect him from any of them. Because they were not physical threats. They were legal, financial, reputational, and no amount of reinforced walls or surveillance cameras could stop them. The panic room was built to protect Michael Jackson from an external enemy, but the real enemy was the system, the legal system that targeted him, the media system that exploited him, the financial system that drained him, and those enemies could not be locked out with a keypad and a steel door. In the end, the panic room became a metaphor for a life lived in fear, for a man who built walls to protect himself and ended up trapped behind them, for the way fame, when combined with trauma, creates a reality that is unbearable. Michael Jackson was one of the most famous people who ever lived, and he spent the last years of his life hiding, in a room, behind walls, watching monitors, waiting for something to happen. And when it did, when the police arrived, when the trial began, when everything collapsed, the room could not save him. The panic room at Neverland is gone now, dismantled, forgotten. But the story it tells remains. It is a story about fear, about isolation, about the way a person, when pushed far enough, will do anything to feel safe. Even if that means building a prison and calling it a sanctuary. Michael Jackson built that prison, and he lived in it, not just physically, but emotionally. And in the end, it was not the threats he feared that destroyed him. It was the fear itself. If you made it this far, you understand something important. That paranoia is not always irrational. That fear can be both justified and destructive. That the line between protection and isolation is thin. Michael Jackson crossed that line, and the panic room at Neverland is evidence of that crossing. It is a reminder that safety, when taken to an extreme, becomes its own kind of cage. And that sometimes the walls we build to keep others out end up keeping us in. Drop a comment, share your thoughts. And if this made you think about fear, about paranoia, about the price of fame, pass it along. Because stories like this are not just about one person. They are about what happens when a life becomes unlivable, when the pressure becomes unbearable, when the only solution seems to be to hide. Michael Jackson hid in a room behind walls, and it did not save him. It just made the end more lonely.